All right, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for coming today. On behalf of all the Idaho Organizing Project, we're so appreciative that you're spending your afternoon with us. Our organization started back just after the election, and we realized that there was a lot of work and a lot of frustration that a lot of us had, specifically around immigration, but other issues that directly affect our community. And we wanted to come together to have a place that we could learn together and start to put together some actions. And so we started off, and we kind of grown incredibly, and then as we've been getting things done and kind of branching off and doing other projects. And so this is one that we felt was really important to all of us, that we really talk about immigration and get some facts out there so that we can all have good conversations with people. So we're not going to be doing a policy talk today. This isn't trying to convince anybody of anything. We just want to help everyone have some facts so that as we're having discussions with our family members, community members, that we're using real information. So on our back table over here, we have some more information. Some of it's about us, the Idaho Organizing Project. We also have some information about things happening with the International Rescue Committee here in Boise, IRC. And then there's also just some interesting packets that we have that give more concrete information about immigration laws and things that are changing, and helps dispel some of the myths that are out there. So you're welcome to any of that back there. There's also a sign-in if you want to keep receiving information from us. Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm Beth Breton-Turner. I'm one of the members of the Idaho Organizing Project. Thank you. So today we have 3 people on our panel. The first is Maria Andrade. She is an immigration attorney here in Boise, and also has a branch in Ontario. So does some in Oregon as well. And she has been doing this work for about 20 years now. We're so appreciative she's here in our community with us. And she's also one of the founding members of IOP. Really instrumental in helping get out good information for all of us. And then next to her we have Ben Stein. He also works at Maria Andrade's office. And he's been doing this work for a long time as well. And they, together at their office, they do all kinds of different immigration work. So whether it's things about documents or doing things with detention, they will work on a lot of that. So we're really appreciative to have both of them here to help give us some good information. And then we have Rabu. He is here from the International Rescue Committee, IRC, and he has been their immigration specialist for about 11 years. He's been with them ever since the IRC office opened here in Boise. So he's been instrumental for a lot of the refugee resettlement community to help get green cards and just good information, family reunification, lots of different things. So our kind of general idea for today is that they are going to be giving some information, kind of going through a PowerPoint to give just kind of a general overview of immigration. We're also going to be coming around to kind of, if anybody has any questions, we'll have some paper that you can hand to either myself. We have a couple other IOP people that'll be kind of standing and walking around that will bring the questions up to them so that we can hopefully get through a lot of questions without having any breaks between it. We're hoping to go until about 6 o'clock, so about 2 hours worth is what we hope. But we'll be happy to stay around if there's questions after that as well. And if anybody needs the Wi-Fi password, Melissa here, waving at us all. She's got the Wi-Fi password, so feel free to kind of wave at her and she will bring it over to you so that you can get onto the network here. Any other questions before we start off?
Maybe the recording, mention the recording.
Oh yes, so we will be recording this to put on the IOP YouTube page so that people that were not able to make it today, they asked that we also have that available for them. We also have been doing some work in Jerome and different places, and a lot of them were not able to be here. So as well that they can share this out for their community. And then we also have someone filming over here that's making a documentary about resettlement in the Boise area, and he's going to be kind of clipping things for his documentary as well. So if anyone has any issues with that, we'll just try to keep the camera up in this area, and we'll come around with the paper for questions and stuff. So we'll try to respect your privacy as much as we can. All right. Oh, yes, please.
Is there any lawyers here for training, for CLE training? We're welcome to send that back here.
Did everybody hear that?
You want to repeat it? Yes, okay.
So if anyone is a lawyer, she has the sign-in to get the CLE hours. So please make sure you sign in if you need those. All right, I think that's it. We're ready to start. Do you guys want the,
I was,
just in case?
I'm not sure.
There is a microphone here. Does it? I don't know. Just for you? Okay.
Yeah, okay. Hi, everyone. I rarely use the microphone, although I was in court recently, and the judge, for the first time, he was the only person, he's like, you're kind of soft-spoken, so why don't you move to the mic? So maybe that's happened now. I'm soft-spoken. So thank you so much for being here. A couple other things on the table. There's other volunteer opportunities. If you're interested, a lot of the work that IOP does is focused around vulnerable communities, particularly non-citizens, because there is no statewide advocacy organization or legal services, like comprehensive legal services service provider in the state at all, unlike many other states. So we've been trying to fill that gap in some respects. So what we're going to do, we do have a 10-minute break worked into the 2 hours, so don't worry about that. If you do have a question, please raise your hand. If we can take it in the moment, we will. Otherwise, someone will come over and pick up your question. So the goal, what we're not going to do today is talk about what we think and what our opinion is about the immigration system. What we'd like to do today is really just provide the nuts and bolts to answer people's questions, like, why don't people just sign up for immigration? How does someone become legal or not legal? Or why does everyone say it's such a hard process? So let's get right into it. And we're going to start, to give you an overview, we're going to talk about first, what are the types of, I'm going to use the word status, but what are the types of categories in which non-citizens in the United States fall into? Some of which are recognized by law and enjoy a lot of rights, like a naturalized citizen or a lawful permanent resident. Uh-oh. Wow, okay. Hello?
Can I hear you?
I think you can probably still. I'll talk loud.
Can you guys hear us when we talk? Can everyone hear us?
Okay.
Because that's
yeah.
fine then.
Okay. And, but there's other people that are in the United States that don't have the same, they're recognized as being here, the government knows they're here, but they have taken choices to maybe not try and take steps to actually physically remove them. So let's go through sort of what are the buckets or the categories really of individuals, and then we're going to go through and talk about does someone who is once in one category always in that category? And if they're not in that category, how does someone get out of this category? So the point being that today somebody could have a certain immigration status and tomorrow have a different one. And it's not quite as easy as saying someone's documented or not documented. So I will use the word documented. That's the vernacular I like to use. I'll have you know the Immigration and Nationality Act, the congressional law that sets out all of the rules for immigration, uses the word alien. So sometimes you'll see the word alien. But the word that you won't see in the Immigration and Nationality Act anywhere defined is illegal or legal. Like you won't find that. So we're going to talk a little bit and also about terminology so that for the rest of the presentation, folks can kind of track what it is we're talking about. Then Ben's going to talk about how do people actually legalize, what are the main ways of doing that. And Rabia will talk about refugee admissions and how people are selected for that, the screening process for that, what kinds of other efforts are made before third country resettlement. Okay, great. And then we're going to talk about what are the biggest obstacles to legalization. Then we'll move into just a little bit on some of the emerging issues with regard to executive actions or executive policies. And if there's time, we'll also talk a little bit about immigrants in detention and what that's like, and sort of what that does to an immigration case. And lastly, we have some statistics on immigrants in Idaho. But our main focus is on the first probably 4 sections that we mentioned. So let's get into it. Let's see. All right, so we're going to talk about immigration status in a spectrum, and the way, can you do that? I'm going to stand up. Okay. So the way I'm going to talk about it is from like the folks that have the most rights, I would say, or protection. And when I think about that, I'm thinking about who can travel freely, who can work wherever they want, who can ask for family members to come into the United States and join them, and who is it hardest to kick out. So starting with those that enjoy the most privileges. First are naturalized citizens. Well, citizens, but naturalized if you're coming, that's mostly the way that non-citizens become citizens. And we have about 20 million that are naturalized per year. The other ways, 2 ways that you become citizens are by birth in the United States, right? But you can also derive citizenship by operation of law. So this may happen if your mother was a citizen or your father was a citizen, and they lived for a certain number of years in the United States, then they moved, and then they had you. So you have to go back and look at some charts because the law changed from year to year, and the chart will tell you if your mom was a citizen or your father was a citizen and they were born within a certain year span, then they had to do X, Y, or Z to transmit as operation of law citizenship to you. So very occasionally, and it's really fun when it happens, when people come in and they're seeking a consultation about maybe they're facing deportation proceedings or detention, and through a magical formula that ends a lot of biographic information, you find out, well, actually you're a citizen. You derive citizenship by operation of law, you never do it, go get a passport. So that's the third way. Lawful permanent residence, so, whoops, one more before. There's about 13.3 million in the United States. That is really sort of the most permanent status before becoming a citizen. And 99.9% of people who become citizens through naturalization must have lawful permanent resident or LPR status for some amount of time. And the amount of time is different depending on how you acquired your lawful permanent residence, through family, through work, through coming in as a refugee or an asylee, but you must hold that status first. And only lawful permanent residents are eligible to travel freely, to ask and bring other folks into the United States, and this is other than citizens, right? And are able to work without restriction wherever they like. Now, a lawful permanent resident, however, still could be deported if they engaged in certain criminal conduct or if they left the United States for the presumptive amount of time is if you leave for more than 6 months, and definitely up to a year, and you don't come back to the US and you don't keep a house and you don't keep your bank account going or you don't have a job to come back to, you could be declared to have abandoned your residence. So you leave, you go on a vacation, turns into a year, you come back in, you present your LPR card, and the immigration inspector's like, how long were you gone? And they're like, well, a couple years, it's gonna come right back. And you may be told, well, we think maybe you've abandoned your residence, and now you're gonna have to go see an immigration judge to show that you didn't really intend to do that. But, and when we talk about paths to citizenship in the dialogue around immigration reform, sometimes you hear camps about people saying, well, it's really important we have a path to citizenship, and other people are like, we just want to get people to work hard. Paths to citizenship really means that at some point, whatever legislation we're talking about leads to this, leads to lawful permanent residence. And so a couple years ago, there was a Senate bill and the Gang of Eight that came out that would have had people eventually getting there, but after like 16 years in some other status. Some of the bills you hear, particularly when they're called just guest worker bills, they're talking about, and we can go to a different kind of visa, one more. They're talking about sometimes something called a non-immigrant visa. So a non-immigrant visa is when we allow people to come to the United States for a specific amount of time for a specific purpose, okay? They go to the border and they say, I am coming to study at BSU, and they're like, great. When you come in, here are your conditions. You have to keep 12 credits, you have to make sure that you come back every year, you can't start failing out, and you can't work. Maybe someone comes on a tourist visa, and they can go to Disneyland and go float down the Boise River, but they cannot work. Someone might come in as a contracted worker, that's often, you hear that an H worker, an H2A, we hear these things, agriculture worker, non-agriculture workers. These are typically people who an employer has to show. They're like, look, I have peaks and bounds in my workflow. Sometimes I need 50 people, sometimes I need like 3. So I need people just to bring in on a seasonal basis. That's generally one category for non-immigrant workers. Some say, look, it's not seasonal, but I cannot find other people to do this kind of work. So because I need 20, engineers that can work on these semiconductors, and I can't find 20 people that have the requisite skills, and so I'm going to bring in somebody to work for a period of time on a project and show that I can't find someone else to do it. So we go back one. So I put the non-immigrants there because although they're lawfully here, they don't have their work, if they are work authorized, is usually tied to an employer. They definitely can, well, not definitely, but for the most part, they can't bring in lots of family members. Sometimes you can have like a spouse or a minor child come with you, but it depends what non-immigrant visa you get. And it doesn't put you on that path to citizenship. There's 1 or 2 visas that allow you to both be here for only a specific purpose, like a short period of time, and over time you can build up years in your favor to get lawful status, but not very many of them, because non-immigrants means that when I come to the United States and I tell the border agent my intent, I'm telling them I don't have immigrant intent, meaning I don't really want to make the U.S. my home. I just want to come for this purpose. So if you are found to have used that process when you really intended to stay forever, it's actually a visa fraud, because you can't use a tourist visa to enter the U.S. if your goal is to do something other than tourism. So the non-immigrant visas typically must show an intent to go back home, and immigrant visas get to say, like, yes, I want to come here forever, and there's like 1 or 2 where you can have both types of intent at the time you enter. So the other bucket of category of folks are folks that are here because of they need protection from either something really horrible that happened to them, like we allow them in because of something really horrible that happened to them for a particular reason, or because we think something really horrible is going to happen to them. Usually because of something they cannot change about themselves, because of their gender, because of their race, or something we don't think they ought to have to change about themselves, like their religion, right? Or where they want to live, if they want to live freely in a certain area, but some area in another country, they don't let people in that look like you or speak your language. So asylum is something we talk about a lot, and that's typically an application that's made by people in the United States already. They already came in one way or the other. Maybe they came in on a visa, and 2 months later, in their vacation, they find out that there's like a revolution in their home country, or that somebody took over, in his ruling party of a different religious group and that now their hometown is totally dangerous for them. So they've already come into the United States, could come in undocumented, but for some reason or another, they're like, I can't go back, and so they're going to make an application in the United States to get protection called asylum that will prevent them from going back home. Refugees, which Rabio will talk about in great detail about how the refugees come here, but the distinction is they're making that application for the same reasons, basically, but from outside the country. People in refugee camps who are internally displaced people who leave from their home country to another country, a neighboring country, and find their way to a refugee camp and then get in line or make applications to come to the United States to avoid persecution. Temporary protected status is, let's see, who's in TPS? Hondurans, El Salvador, and Haiti. So, when you have the earthquake, like in Haiti, you had like a horrible hurricane, right, in Honduras, and people are just massively displaced. Then the executive can make a designation. They could say, okay, Haiti, now, you guys, if you show you were in the United States on the date I made this law or within the 2 months that followed, we're going to give you, we're going to acknowledge your presence. We're not going to put you on the path of citizenship, or we're not going to send you back because it would be really horrible for you to have to go back. Right now, there's nothing to go back to. Right now, temporary protected status is in the news quite a bit. The president has been making a lot of statements about how he's just going to cancel temporary protected status under the guise of, oh, those countries are safe now. I think you'll talk about Liberia is one of, I think, is it Liberia that's one of them? Haiti that they're starting to send back.
El Salvador.
El Salvador, they're talking about, yeah, canceling El Salvador. Withholding of removal and Convention Against Torture. In short, these are designations that you get that are similar to asylum. So you're doing it either because the government is going to persecute you, or someone else is going to persecute you, or way I think about it in general is that if you can reach asylum, if you can get asylum, you can probably, or doesn't mean you can meet the standard for withholding of removal or Convention Against Torture. Basically, you just have to show it's like 51% likely that this bad stuff you think is going to happen to you is going to happen to you. In the asylum context, it's more like a 10% chance. You still have to generally have it happen for a certain particular reason we think is worthy of protecting, race, religion, gender, something like that. And the thing, though, that's different is that these don't lead to a path to citizenship. These will never lead to lawful permanent resident status. And there's a lot of people in these categories. So it could be that you, maybe you have a criminal conviction that makes you ineligible for asylum, and you happen to show, though, the 50% chance or 51% chance you're going to be harmed if you get returned. So we still won't deport you, but we're going to not let you bring in family members. We're not going to let you traveling would be not advisable. And you're not going to become a citizen. And if we think maybe your country isn't so bad one day, we can just send you out. So withholding of removal really communicates this the easiest, right? Because people that have withholding means, it could easily say withholding of deportation. It means a judge has found that, you know, if not for this special protection that we think that, you know, you need from your home country, we would have deported you. And the minute we think that your home country is better, we're going to deport you. And I should say, it's not, this is not as tenuous in terms of being able to be returned to your country, because the danger here, Convention Against Torture protection comes from an international convention, and it's actually mandatory. Like if somebody shows a judge that you have this level of possibility of harm, and it's because it's a government actor who's going to do it to you, it's your own government, like I fear harm from El Salvador, then we cannot, as a matter of law, return you to that country. But here's what we can do. We can try and look for an alternate country that will take you. And so sometimes they'll look for another country that might take an individual that we've given Convention Against Torture protection. The last one, special immigrant juvenile status, is for people, young people who are minors under state law, who have received an order from a state court, or there's been a state court finding that it is not in their best interest because of abuse, neglect, or abandonment to reunite that child with one or more of their parents. Okay? And so this often will, like some of the Central American minors that have been coming across the border can fall in this category. It's one that I think is really underused if you're someone who works like in juvenile justice or in education or in mental health or medical care, is that people don't know about this one because it's sort of counterintuitive, because you could have one, you only need to show it reuniting is not in the best interest. Reuniting with one of your parents is not in the best interest because of neglect, abandonment, or abuse. But it's tricky because you have to go to a state court judge and get a state court order, and then you file that with some papers to an immigration agency. So these are that category. Let's see what's next. Okay, so we talked about non-immigrant visas. So then I call this the legal limbo lobby. Well, I had this like way of analogizing it to housing, but couldn't quite pull it off. So anyway, there are people who are what we would call in legal limbo. So let's take one that most people are familiar with, which is Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, DACA for short. It's what Obama created by executive action when the DREAM Act didn't pass, and the DREAM Act was designed to provide young people who were brought here as young people who are in schools, graduated from school or college, and don't have criminal convictions, to be able to at least be told, hey, you're not a priority for deportation. We're going to actually let you get a work card so you can work lawfully, and but that's all you get. Like, doesn't put you on a path to get the legal residence. It doesn't put you on the path to get citizenship. And much like TPS designations, the DACA was created is a creation of the executive branch. Okay, so it didn't have to go through Congress, which means it can be undone. It can be undone very quickly. Note, so you may have all heard that there was a letter sent to the president by 9 states, attorneys generals of 9 states, that said to the president, when he's been wavering on whether or not what he's going to do with DACA, they said, look, if you don't cancel and rescind DACA, we are going to sue you like we sued over what was called DAPA, which was a program for parents of U.S. citizens, and the government had been sued in Texas, and it went to the Supreme Court, and it was declared that they couldn't go forward with that program. But so the same states that were involved in that lawsuit are threatening lawsuit. And it's unfortunate but true that Idaho is one of the states, and Idaho is the only state that had both the Attorney General and the governor sign that letter. So one of the actions that the IOP is very interested in working on, and there's a DACA week that's going to be that's starting next week that our education committee is working on, is to really pressure the state government on this particular point. All right, so parole is something where somebody has a need to just come into the United States for a simple purpose, but there's no like pre-existing visa. So for instance, if a non-citizen is, let's say we have a case like this, it's fine. We have a visa-authorized temporary worker who worked in Idaho in forestry and was not paid. And he went back home and were co-counsel on a suit for his wages. And he has been trying to come back in through a different employer and hasn't been able to get the same short-term worker visa. And his mediation is coming up, court-ordered mediation. We need to bring him back to be in court. So one of the ways to try and get him in would be to ask for him to be paroled in and say, look, there's a public interest in bringing this person here for this limited purpose. And it really is just for a very short time, short purpose. Generally, sometimes you can get work authorization if the period of time is long enough. Sometimes you can't. Sometimes this is given to undocumented immigrants who provide information to law enforcement about where they might be able to find criminals. And so they give them this thing while they provide information, and then one day they'll find out, it's not funny actually, but they'll find out that they're no longer needed, and they go in to renew their card, and it's been yanked because immigration says, well, we got everything we need from you, so we'll just take that card back, thank you very much. So parole can also be for a family who needs medical treatment for a child and the treatment's only available in the United States. And they need to often have paperwork that shows that they're somebody who could be financially responsible for them during that time. So that's what parole is about. Prosecutorial discretion, I mean, we call it as a thing, but basically under President Obama, there were directives to the prosecuting attorneys in immigration court. So this is not uncommon, very much like criminal court, like prosecutors decide whether they're going to prosecute every jaywalker or not, or maybe they're going to go after instead drug dealers or people who commit thefts. And so they exercise prosecutorial discretion. I'm going to not prosecute you, but I'm going to prosecute you. So President Obama issued these directives that said, look, here's like the priority of people that you should be going after. And so a lot of people became known to immigration authorities, were on the brink of being put in removal proceedings, or were in removal proceedings, but maybe their defense attorney made a motion, or even the prosecutor could have made a motion to say, you know what, this person not a priority, let's just take their case off calendar. One of the things that has changed locally is that because those executive order priorities memos have basically been eliminated with new executive orders that say everybody's a priority, everybody, we have seen not only that we don't get prosecutorial discretion, but some of those cases that we fought really hard to get out of court are being what's called recalendared. Immigration, the prosecutors are making motions saying, guess what, now we're interested in this person, we know where they are, let's bring them back in court. So, and these are some of the most, I mean, they're like the most sympathetic people, you know. I mean, you would never have gotten prosecutorial discretion to stop your case unless you had like no crimes, you had lots of ties to family members here, you had some sort of positive contributions to your community. So it's really, it's really been a shift in where the government has decided they wanted to spend their resources. All right, so let's just go through a couple of basic concepts before moving into Ben's section. So how do people move in and out of status? So when I was saying someone's undocumented or maybe they're in one of these limbo stages, so people can move in and out of statuses. Say they can move into becoming some, like on the path to citizenship, say if they have an appropriate family relationship. So they have a family relationship that Congress has decided allows them to be the beneficiary of a family member's request for them. So there's only certain family relationships that qualify. So Ben will get into that. But if I have a qualifying family relationship with somebody who's lawfully here or a citizen, then maybe they can file what's called, we call an affirmative application for me. My husband, my brother maybe can file an application for me on a family basis. There's also categories of people that can get employment-based petitions, similar types of petitions. They're affirmative, meaning you're not at the brink of deportation, you're actually going out, filling out paperwork, filing it. But it has to be a certain category of employment. Okay? And then there's only so many people allowed in under each category per year, and only a certain number per country per year, which leads to really long waiting times, which we'll explain later. So another way you can move in and out of status is you can be deported, right? Everybody can be deported. Because, I mean, everyone can be deported unless you were born in the United States, because maybe you didn't really derive citizenship the way that we thought. Or maybe when you got your legal permanent resident status, the government thinks you lied about something that would have made a difference. And so they might say, well, you never should have gotten LPR status, so we're now going to try and rescind your naturalization and deport you. I mean, and we tell our clients, like, the safest thing to do is, if you are eligible, is to naturalize. Because the reasons for which someone could be deported changes all the time. In 1990, the list of crimes for which could get you deported went from like this to this. And it was during the time when they were starting to deport a lot of the folks that had started these really big international, well, they weren't international at the time, LA gangs, MS-13 we've heard of, Barrio 18, and those are gangs that started in California. And we brought, and a lot of them were young people, young children who'd come in and seen real bad civil war, you know, in their home countries. And when they got deported, were like renowned, you know, had some street cred, if you want to say it that way, for being like a US LA gang person, and it just, you know, just like ballooned into what we now see are really big, serious gang problems in certain countries. So naturalization, we encourage lots of people to do. So the other way you can move in and out is maybe you can file one of those applications for asylum, or maybe you are on the brink of deportation. You get identified by Immigration and Customs Enforcement, they put you in deportation proceedings, and at that moment, some people can say, hey, you know what though, I can legalize through my spouse or someone else. Or they'll say, you know what, I really am scared to go back to my home country, so can I file an application for asylum? Some people, if they can show that close family members will suffer extreme hardship, it's hard to define, but think of like if I'm the sole care provider or source of support for my elderly parents, and I have 2 children, one's a US citizen, one's a legal resident, and one needs ongoing medical care that's only available in the United States. That's a pretty good case to ask a judge to cancel your removal of court or your deportation. But of course there's other qualifiers, and just know that most crimes, many crimes, keep you ineligible for those, to get your deportation canceled. And then another way you can move in and out of status is if one of those legal limbo protections is taken away from you. If the parole is just yanked from you one day. Okay, let's go to the next one. So a couple things to keep in mind, and I'm always, I forget that, because we live this all the time, I forget people don't know this, but so the immigration system is civil, okay? Meaning that your penalty for being here undocumented is that I deport you. I don't put you in jail. And now we just remove people. Sounds good, but we remove people. And because the penalty is not incarceration, that's why you do not get a free defense lawyer in immigration proceedings. And although the Supreme Court has said, like, deportation can be, banishment from your family, can be worse than any amount of exile, and it's as serious a penalty as incarceration. As a practical matter, yes, that's true. As a legal matter, that's not true, because we have yet to afford people facing deportation free defense attorneys. For the same reason, some of the protections, the procedural protections that are accompany a defendant in criminal, like your right against self-incrimination and your right not to have what we call like out-of-court statements used against you. So if I can't testify, like, oh, Ben told me yesterday that she was gonna do this crime. Like, you'd never be able to generally say something like that kind of evidence in court because we don't like, third-hand, fourth-hand information. It doesn't feel reliable enough. And those types of rules are in the federal rules of evidence. The federal rules of evidence don't apply to immigration proceedings. So a lot more suspect evidence or iffy evidence could be admitted that wouldn't be admitted in a regular court proceeding. And the other misunderstanding sometimes is that now, while unlawful entry, like the physical act of entry into the United States, could be established to be a criminal act. There's a criminal code that says you could go to jail for the entry. The presence, once you're here, the physical presence of being here is not a criminal offense. That's and it was made really clear in the U.S. versus Arizona case when they had that bill that Arizona wanted to make all their cops immigration agents, and they're like, there's no crime. You can't run around saying I think you're here unlawfully, because the presence of being here unlawfully is not a criminal offense. It's a civil offense. So that's, I think, my overview. You're up.
All right.
Right? Yeah.
I guess we're standing.
All right. Come on.
Okay, so my name is Ben Stein, and I'm going to talk about really the basic way in which the immigration system, how it works. And so I think this is like one of the most important parts, because I think one of the biggest misconceptions that you hear is that that there's a line, and if people get in line, they're going to be able to become a resident someday, or they're going to be able to legalize, or that people, if they wanted to, that they could just fill out an application and legalize. And you'll see that for some people it's just never a possibility, that there's no way for them ever to immigrate according to our system right now. And so when thinking about why these rules exist and what Maria talked about in terms of like humanitarian relief, these are the principles that are supposedly underlying underlying the immigration system, and it's family reunification, which will be in this family-based system that I'm going to talk about. Admitting people with skills that are valuable to the U.S. economy, and that is an employment-based system that sometimes allows people to reside permanently. And then there's protecting refugees, which has to do with the asylum and the Convention Against Torture Relief. The United States has an international obligation to provide protection for someone that's going to suffer torture. That's more likely than not they will suffer torture. It's under the United Nations Protocol, the Geneva Convention. And then also to promote diversity in the United States is another fundamental reason for immigration. Okay, so how people legalize. All right, so it's more complicated than just getting in line. There's a piece of, all of this comes from the Immigration and Nationality Act, which is a statute, so it was passed by Congress. When Raghu talks, he's going to speak about refugee admissions, which are set by the executive branch, which are set by the President of the United States. So These are all statutory within the Immigration and Nationality Act, which is the immigration law. So there's a visa, so each year, the United States admits 675,000 immigrants worldwide. There are certain people that are exempt from this, so that are not included in the 675,000. Those people are what's referred to as immediate relatives. So like, when a US citizen spouse petitions for their US citizen, or US citizen petitions for their spouse, that's an immediate relative. And so they're not subject to this visa preference system, and they're not subject to this 675,000 cap. The other two immediate relatives are children that are under 21 of a US citizen, and they're unmarried, and then also parents of a over 21-year-old US citizen. So those are the only categories that are not within this visa preference system when you're doing family-based immigration.
Oh, just tell me.
Yeah, so that's it. Okay, so this line, which we'll talk about, is the visa priority system. We're going to do a couple examples so you can see how it works. But the main point, though, is that unless you're part of one of those three groups I just discussed, you're going to have to go into the visa priority system, and you can't come immediately. So, for example, lawful permanent resident, a petition by a lawful permanent resident, when Maria spoke about lawful permanent residents not having the same rights as citizens, or not having the same protections, like the petition from a lawful permanent resident will never be an immediate relative. Okay, so who can petition for someone is the question now. Because what defines like a family-based for family-based. So these are the people that can file petitions, meaning that they have what's called a priority group. For LPRs, they can file for their spouses or their unmarried children, both under 21 and unmarried over 21. So lots of times, like a common scenario that we hear of is like someone filed a petition for, an LPR filed a petition for their child, who, and that petition was fine, and then they got married, and it revoked the petition because an LPR cannot file for a married child. That happens pretty frequently. For US citizens, you have those immediate relatives, you have their parents, their children, their spouse. And they can also file for their siblings, which will fit them into a priority group. And I'll show that. So an important thing to point out here is that you can't petition for like your cousins, your grandparents can't petition for you. People that, I think it's surprising sometimes that people that have from different cultures or from where like families can be big, and you consider like your cousin to be your family member, but under the immigration law, that's not a relationship that's going to allow you to bring them here. So. Okay, do you want to pull up
Which way would you like? The
visa
chart?
bulletin?
The visa bulletin? Yeah.
So, okay. So we have some slides that are here. I think this is just the easiest way to show it.
Okay. I'll do it.
This is the visa bulletin. This is the allocation of visas in the United States. So here are the different categories.
I'm going to give you final action date family.
Okay.
Okay.
So here are the different categories. So what this means is like someone in an F1 category.
F1 is adult children.
And so like an adult, so you look at like an adult child of a US citizen. When they file a petition, they go into one of these categories. And the website it details the categories, but so they'll go into an F1 category. And so say it's from, say the US citizen that filed the petition was from Mexico. Then they will go into this box right here, which means that a petition that was filed on February 1st, 1996 by a US citizen parent would allow someone to immigrate to the United States. In August of 2000, this is the August 2017, it changes every month. But these dates, they don't go day by day. So like this February 1st, 1996 date, if it goes day by day, right, then the person's looking at a 21-year wait before they can immigrate. But the reality is that that date might not ever become current. So let's give you an example of someone from like Somalia, we'll say, and they want to petition for, so they're a U.S. citizen. So they say they became a U.S. citizen. So we talked about who they can petition for. A U.S. citizen can petition for their parent, their child, their spouse, or their sibling. Now their parent, their child, or their spouse would be an immediate relative. So they would not be in this classification system. But if it was a sibling, so if a Somalian person filed a I-130 petition for their sibling, then we go and we find out which group it is, and it's the fourth priority group. So we look, and then we see that Somalia doesn't have a specific designation, so it's in the all chargeability areas. So he goes May 8th, 2004. So for someone to bring their brother or something that's a U.S. citizen, they would have had to file on May 8th, 2004 to be able to now have their sibling immigrate to the United States. So, yeah, see it. So,
Yeah, well, maybe talk about F2A and F2B because you know how when you turn from one. Yes.
yeah, so then there's something called age out, which happens a lot too. So, all right. So F2A and F2B, these correlate to lawful permanent residents filing petitions. So like, we'll use Mexico because it happens really frequently with my cases. Is that, all right? So a lawful permanent resident will file a petition for their 20-year-old son, we'll say, who's unmarried, so that they have a group. So that person would be in the F2B, or F2A, sorry. When they're under 21, they're in the F2A group if their lawful permanent resident files for them. So right now, that priority date is September 1st, 2015. So like for a child of a lawful permanent resident from Mexico to immigrate here, the petition would need to have been filed on September 1st, 2015. And then keep in mind that these dates don't move day by day. I'd like to think that could be within 2 years, but I don't know. The problem though is that when someone turns over 20 years old, they're no longer in this F2A group. And then they go to this F2B, which would mean that they're only adjudicating petitions from 1996. So the chances of a lawful permanent resident, so that's happened pretty frequently with a lot of people, is that they file for their lawful permanent residents, file for their children when they were young, and it takes so long to these petitions to become current that they became adults, and now they're in this really long waiting time. And hopefully never married, because then if they got married, then they would have been revoked if their parents were lawful permanent residents. So, this is the line.
And if they did get in, their status would be?
So the question was, so when they did get in, what would be their status? So an I-130 petition, which is what this is when we talk about the petition that's filed, it's called an I-130 petition, and it's the family petition. And assuming that when that date's current, if there's no other barriers to them immigrating, which we'll talk about later, then they would enter as lawful permanent residents. But there's barriers we're going to talk about, but one of them is that the petitioner needs to show that they'll financially support the person. And there's just a lot of barriers that are oftentimes arbitrary and don't make sense that we're going to talk about later. But this is the line. So if you don't have one of these relationships, you can't immigrate.
So I have a question about the aging out.
Okay?
So you got a kid that's been in line since September, whatever it is, 2015. And it goes from F2A, has a birthday, to B. Is he then back? Does he get to keep the date they were filed, or does he now have a new date of filing? How do they?
Yes, that's a good question. He gets to keep the date that's filed. So that's been something that's been litigated a lot about. It's called the Child Protection Status Act, right? Child Status Protection Act. And so if that visa was never terminated, he should be able to keep that priority date. So
So he doesn't age out of the date itself?
For a U.S. citizen.
well, so the date itself is the date that the petition was filed. So yeah, he should keep the date.
Okay, sorry. Do you want me to go to allocations for waiting times, like how you got to the waiting times? Sorry. Oh, stand by.
So these are the ways the visas are allocated. As I said, there's 675,000 per year. Immediate relatives are not subject to that. So the wait time that we just talked about, like as we showed for a son of a lawful permanent resident from Mexico, the petition would have needed to have been filed about 22 years ago. And that's assuming that it moves day by day, and it doesn't. So this line that you get into could really, sometimes in some cases, it has no realistic chance of this, the person being able to actually get the benefit of the petition. I don't want to deter people from filing petitions though. Also because there are changes in the law that give you a benefit even if you can't use that petition. So, I guess let's talk about that right now. How people. So what happens when this petition? Did you? Yeah.
But a citizen can file for their sibling. Is that correct? And the wait is not as long?
We'll go back to this.
I'll find it for you.
So all this is on the visa bulletin. So.
Oh, stand by. Here we go.
Here you go.
So that's this category.
So this is so first, when a U.S. citizen applies for their sibling, this is the F4 category. And so yes, the wait for a Mexican national or a Mexican lawful permanent or citizen, had to be citizen that filed for their sibling, would be September 15th, 1997. I'm not sure the rationale why it's not as long.
Well, I mean, the way that you can sort of think about it is like, so we have this worldwide number of visas, right? Then we're going to divvy them up by who we think are the closest relationships, right? We're going to give most to the closest relationships. Then whatever's not, then we're also going to say we don't want to be flooded from applications from one country, right? So every country can't have more than 7%, they can't take up more than 7% of the total number available in their category. So if you have more applications from some countries like China, India, Mexico, and Philippines, right, it creates this backlog for years and years and years. And the reason we don't know what next month's visa bulletin is going to say is because part of the calculation is based on how many were used the month before and the month before. And so it's maddening because sometimes the numbers go backwards. You're like, oh great, well let's check the visa bulletin in 2 months and maybe you'll be closer. And you'll look at it and you'll see, because there's one person who decides kind of how to allocate the visas, said, you know what, we need to take more out of that F4 category because we had way more applications from a closer family relationship. So we're going to actually make this number go backwards. So sometimes they'll go backwards and you look at it the next month and it's like 1996. You're like, what? So this is part, I think, of the reason why nobody gets the line thing. It's complicated. It's super complicated.
Yeah, because it's not a true line either. It's not moving like day by day.
Okay.
I know we kind of went through a lot of it, but I guess
Let me go to,
when these dates do become current, that's a good question. So that's when you're eligible to receive an immigrant visa. And Maria talked about the different types of visas, right? So there's a non-immigrant visa, which allows for temporary permission to be here. And there's an immigrant visa, which allows someone to lawfully permanent resident to become a lawful permanent resident. So these are some of the waits for people that we kind of went through. I mean,
yeah.
But so anyway, so when this petition's current, the person, if there are 2 ways that people can become lawful permanent residents. They can either do it from inside the country, which is called adjustment of status, or you can do it from outside the country, which is called consular processing. And so for adjustment of status, the 2 ways that people can adjust status, there's other exceptions to this, but the 2 main ways that people can become residents through adjustment of status is if they entered with permission, or entered with inspection, it's called. So if someone entered with a visa, and there was no fraud or anything, and they overstayed, and they were here, then that they could adjust status here in the United States once this petition became current. And there's other barriers, which we're going to talk about later. So each case requires like an analysis, and you probably want to talk to an attorney if you have any issues. Another way that someone can adjust status in the United States is if there's a very old petition filed on their behalf. It's called 245I, INA 245I. So that's why when I'm saying, even if this petition might never become current, I don't want to deter people from filing petitions, because you still might be able to get some benefit from that petition in the future, just not under the law as it stands right now. So, and then the second way, if you can't adjust status in the United States, then you have the consular process, which means actually going to the consulate and picking up the visa and then coming through after you have an appointment with an immigrant visa, with a consular officer. So in Mexico, that'd be going to Ciudad Juarez and having an interview with a consular officer, and then if you get the visa approved, you can come back as a lawful permanent resident, or come in as a lawful permanent resident. So there are a lot of other barriers to people being able to do that, which we're going to talk about later. But I'm going to turn it over to Ravi. We're going to break it now.
I think I can open yours. I just wanted you to know that this, the screening process, there's a handout that looks kind of like this in the back, if you want to get it, but I'm going to get to some different slides real quick.
One thing I did want to mention, I made a slight mistake. Ravu has been with the IRC for 11 years in a couple different capacities and has specifically been doing immigration for 5 years. So sorry about that.
Keep it real.
And also, if anybody does have a question, you can kind of raise your hand up and look for myself or like Melissa, and we'll run over like slips of paper that we can run up to these guys so that they can continue as they're talking, but then we'll be able to get all of your questions in as well, hopefully.
Okay.
All right, there we go.
Thank you. So today I'm going to talk about refugees in general and also specifically refugees in Idaho. So what makes someone a refugee? So to be considered a refugee from under Immigration and National Act, so this is the definition for a refugee. First, he must cross the international border. You cannot call yourself a refugee while you are in your country of origin. Second, you cannot return to your country of origin. And third, unable to return because of fear of persecution. And there are 5 types of persecution under the Immigration and National Act. So, which is race, religion, nationality, membership, and particular membership of particular group and political opinion. So in order to be a refugee, you have to have one of these, one of the 5 types of persecution or a combination of these 5. Next.
Okay.
So about, I think from now I will ask you a question about how many refugees are there in the world right now.
Ready, Maria? Just hit
Oh,
the
are you ready? Okay.
Hey.
The question is B. And the next one, about how many forcibly displaced people are there in the world right now? C? Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Yes. And then another quiz, so it's not here, about how many refugees
Oops.
do we have here in Idaho since 1975?
Oh, I don't know.
No. 1975.
75, when they started bringing refugees here in Idaho.
15,000.
Yeah, I'll say 15.
More than that, less than 50.
Oh. 35?
21,000 refugees can call Idaho home.
Yeah.
So with these numbers of refugees, so too many, just 19 million or 20 million, what they decided, they come up with 3 durable solutions for refugees. The first one, it's voluntary repatriation, which is to send people back in their country of origin. Unfortunately, in the last 2 decades, it has not been happening. If you follow the news, the war in Somalia or in Congo is still going on since the late 90s. So of course, they do not want to send a person back if the person is not safe and cannot be safe in his country of origin. So they came up with another solution, which is local integration. If you remember at the beginning of my presentation, I said in order to be called a refugee, you have to cross the international border. So they go to a host country. That host country, some of the country, they provide permanent residency or sometimes even citizenship to these refugees to stay there. Unfortunately, it has not been happening because a lot of these countries, they have their own problems. And if you see, when they move to go to another country, sometimes they don't even speak the language. One case, if you take Karen refugees that are stateless or Rohingya, they go to Thailand. In Thailand, they don't speak Burmese. And then they usually put them in the middle of nowhere, not in the city. You cannot work, and it's just a refugee camp. So the last one that they came up, the last solution, it's a third resettlement country. So to send them back in like what we are doing here, resettling refugees from different parts of the world, to send them either in the US or in other countries. Next.
Next, okay.
Yes.
Oh,
Okay.
very nice.
Less
Raghu.
than 1% of these refugees receive third country resettlement. And all of that 1%, the United States used to take half of all refugee resettled in the world. And in addition to the US, there are also 25 other countries that resettle refugees. The politic for the US, I don't know now, but they try to push developed countries to accept more refugees. Recently, we had new countries such as Japan, Brazil, that are taking refugees, but in a very small numbers. Which is really not very helpful. Unfortunately, in the last 2 years,
I don't see any of the main European countries up there, Spain, France, Germany, are they not?
they just started.
They just.
That's why they are not in. I think the biggest one was US, Australia, New Zealand, and Canada. So if they are not here on this list, they just started. And Germany specifically, I think in the last 2 years, we heard about them regarding refugees when they had that flood of Syrian refugees who went over there. So next.
Okay.
So a lot of people are asking themselves, how do refugees get here in the US, and what's the process? So before I show you the process, we are going to talk about the key players in refugee resettlement. The first one is the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. What do? They usually responsible for the care of people fleeing their country. And they provide basic needs such as water, food, shelter, and also protection from harm. And they are very active in the refugee camps. If you go to like Kakuma and Thailand, so these are biggest refugee camp. The next key player is the Department of Homeland Security. So what do? What they do the background check and they screen also refugees. Also, they make the final determination to see whether this refugee meets the qualification of the US law. So only Homeland Security can give them the refugee status. The third one, it's IOM, International Organization for Migration. So what do? Every refugee that comes here in the US has to go through a health screening. So they are responsible for the health screening, but also they are responsible to schedule the transport, to arrange the transportation from the refugee camp to their resettlement country or place. And they travel, they arrange the travel, which is a loan for refugees. So imagine for a family of 6 or a family of 7, the more people you have in your family, the more money you have to pay back. And it's around $900 per person. And 6 months after being resettled here, they have to start paying that money back to IOM. And sometimes I think it's around $30 per person and per month. So that's the last key player. Or one of them, I think it's my organization, the International Rescue Committee. But in the US, there are 9 voluntary agencies that are allowed to resettle refugees here in the US. And the International Rescue Committee, World Relief, and ANA are one of them. So.
Okay, next. There you go.
Okay, that's the rigorous process that every refugee must go before coming to the US. In theory, if you follow the news, they say it takes 2 years. But in reality, it's more than that. The average stay in a refugee camp is 17 years. So it went from 10 years to 17 years in the last 5 years. So it's really not easy to come. So we resettled some of the refugees from Burundi that have been in the refugee camp for 32 years. And they are here in Boise. So that's the first time. I think they have to go through a screening and a pre-screening with Resettlement Service Support Center. So there are the one that conduct the screening and the pre-screening. Once approved, then they have to go through the security check with the Department of Homeland Security. And this thing can take years. Sometimes you see families, they started together, and then part of the family is here, the other family is held back in the refugee camp. Why? Because they are not clear for security check. So they have to wait years and years, and usually we don't know when they are going to clear out from the security check. So if they pass that security check. In the post 9/11, I think they started screening refugees even more. In addition to that, they have to go through a screening with CIA, FBI, and other intelligence organization. So that's the screening that they have to go through before coming here in the US. When everything is done, they are clear, they pass, now they go and receive a medical screening. The same thing, people on the news, when you follow the media, they talk about refugees coming here with TB. No, everybody, if they have TB, they will not enter here in the US. If they have active TB, they will not enter in the US. And there are also some of the diseases that it's been here, it's been eradicated in the US, but if they show such a disease, some of them, they will not enter in the US. And so they go through IOM, International Organization for Migration. They are responsible for the health screening, and also they schedule the arrival with, for refugees. So from there, approve refugees, they go through a cultural orientation. Again, I think that's where we ask the help for the community to come and be a mentor for refugee families. A person who's coming here to spend the rest of his life, and some of them they spend only 6 hours for a cultural orientation and expect them to know everything once they arrive here in the US, including immigration law. So, which is, I think, very difficult. So, after they pass the cultural orientation, there is the refugee case is allocated to a resettlement agency by the Refugee Processing Center. So, usually the Refugee Processing Center, they contact these voluntary agencies. So, there are the one who will contact the field offices and then arrange the transport to the country. So first of all, we look at family ties. If the person, let's say, has his children or parents in Idaho, they try to bring them here in Idaho, close to his parents. And sometimes also we look at languages. If they speak a language and we don't have interpreters here in Idaho, we don't bring them. So we send them to other places. I know Cubans, for example, they tend to go to Phoenix and or Florida, so we don't bring them here. The biggest population is in that area. Once they send the offices a VOP, verification of placement, usually, okay, if they have a US ties, we check with the US ties. Your family is coming. Would you want him to come to Boise, Idaho? They said yes, and then we send back the notification and they send a confirmation to us that that person will be coming to Boise. And we assure the case and approve applicants who successfully complete all screening are scheduled for departure to the US. So this is the same thing you have over there for the screening process, screening of refugees before coming to the US. So these are numbers of refugees. Most of the refugees that are coming here in the US are children. They said 50% of them are children. And if you combine, 80% are children and women and children. So of refugees coming are women and children. One reason, one explanation is I think men have been killed, and what is left, women and children that are the one coming here in the U.S. And the top countries, 5 countries that are coming here in the U.S., mostly now we are resettling Congolese refugees. And the second biggest population are Syrian. I believe since October, our fiscal year starts in October. So since October, we have resettled 219 Syrians here in Idaho, more than even the state of New York. So we do have Burmese and Iraqi, Somali. We have Eritrean in small numbers, and Afghani also. Afghani, there are more likely like SIV, special immigrant visa, that are coming right now. So, next.
Okay. I think that was your,
That's all.
I think that's all you gave me.
Oh, okay. So, what do we do when they come here once they arrive in the US? What are the benefits that we provide to refugees? So once they come, they receive a case management, employment services, and immigration services. In the case management, they connect them with resources here in Idaho, such as food stamps, Medicaid, if they have children, schools, and also we provide housing when they first arrive here, and as well as cash assistance. So there is up to 8 months of cash assistance. These people, they should be self-sufficient and start paying their bills after that. Public benefits, yes, and in Idaho, we had 3 resettlement agencies. The biggest one is located in Twin Falls, and well, 4 CSI in Twin Falls and 3 in Boise. Used to be 3, and then now, since the ban, World Relief closed, and then we have only Agency for New American and IRC. So total of 3 resettlement agency in Idaho.
I think that might have been,
So
Yep.
that's it. So
And I guess a question though for you, Ravi, which would be good is, do children have to go through the same security process as adults?
if you are 18 and older, you have to go through the process.
Okay, so if you're 18 or younger, you do not have to?
18 and younger than 18, you don't have to.
Okay.
okay.
All right.
I know a lot of people, like, you know, their biggest issue surrounding refugees is the fact that they do take public services. So can you go into a little bit more about
Yes, I thought I had a slide for that.
Let's see, I'll take a look and see.
Yes.
I don't think we had one specifically, did we?
No, but it's what?
Maria, if you go, I think
Uh-huh.
yours,
In mine?
might have it.
Okay.
Yes.
And 1 second.
So,
Do you know which one it is?
refugees accessing benefit, I mean? Yes, it has been
I don't
shown
think
that
we have.
after 2 years, a refugee, I have some data here, I can show it to you. After 2 years, they pay more than they receive in taxes. For one simple example here, I have a slide, but I can show it to you later on. So they open businesses also, and they buy houses. Every time they do it, they pay back taxes. Right now in Boise, I think if you check a lot of refugee restaurant, Kibron's restaurant and Goodness Land, as well as Tara Fashions. So these are businesses that they just created. I think most of them, they came here in the US in the last 5 years. Another one also in Ohio, there was a city that was dying and people left completely in that's I believe it's Dayton, Ohio. So a lot of refugees, they went back over there because housing was so cheap back in 2008, and they were able to take a loan and take these houses. They fixed them up, and now that that city, it's big, and people, it's back in the life again. So.
What about SSI and stuff like you were talking about?
Oh, yes. But one thing also, refugees, they have a special status. So if you are 65 or older, as soon as you hit the American soil, if you are a refugee or an asylee, you get SSI. The money you get, it's minimum per month, but it's only for 7 years. If you do not become a US citizen, that SSI will stop. They either have to become a US citizen to get the money going, or just stay with no income. However, they will have Medicaid and food stamps.
Okay, so
More towards like people talking about refugees taking American citizenship, and here in Idaho we have over 51 languages we have to serve. There is not the adequate resources for interpretation services for 51 different languages, and phone interpretation is not the greatest. And you only get a 6-hour cultural orientation. So imagine navigating this, trying to find a job, trying to repay all this other stuff in order to take away Americans' benefits. It's really hard because you have language barriers, you have cultural barriers. There's so many different things, and a lot of times if you don't have somebody that's there to help you, you don't have access to a lot of these benefits that refugees can have access to, because after 8 months, IRC and other refugee centers aren't there to help them to give them the support that they have.
So, because we're recording, so if we could, that's part of the reason we want it written, or it's okay, but we'll just stop and summarize. If you could summarize maybe her point.
Oh, okay. I thought she was responding
Was a good
to the
point.
question.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, to summarize, refugees, when they come, because of the language barrier, if I understood, they really do not have time for that. The only time I think they have is to be able to support their family. By 8 months, they have to have a job and start working and paying back. So even the loan for IOM, if you see, 6 months after arriving here in the US, you have to start paying it back. The money that was given to you, the airplane ticket, it's a loan. So really, as soon as they come here, they have a loan also under their name. So really, I don't think they pay more than they take after 2 years.
okay. All right. Oh, okay. I'll do that.
Thank you. So I have some questions that I think I can answer, and they kind of go right into my presentation, my second part of the presentation, which is going to be like, what are the potential barriers? But first, so there were some questions like, what status does a refugee enter in? A refugee enters in refugee status. It's a humanitarian status. I remember when Maria, before I would slide up about different humanitarian statuses. A refugee enters in humanitarian status, and then they become lawful permanent residents when they file an application for adjustment of status. Okay?
Did you want me to do the fees now?
Again, another question though was, what options are there for people that assist the U.S. military? There are certain statutory laws, which means that they were created by Congress. The special immigrant visa, which was mentioned, is for interpreters in Afghanistan and Iraq, and that allows people to enter as a lawful permanent resident. There was in the news because the United States was not refusing to allow some to enter, right? I think the reality sometimes is that a lot of people that aid the U.S. military will come in as refugees, or they'll be in the United States, and then will apply for asylum, because aiding the U.S. military could cause them to have problems in their country. They could fall into a particular social group based on aiding the U.S. military.
Sorry, I'm having a little trouble.
So now we'll talk about,
a little trouble with this.
Some very
Stand
right.
by.
So first, the general question, which is a really good question, is what is the name of the agency that oversees immigration? Immigration is a huge bureaucracy. So there are multiple different agencies that are involved. The Department of Homeland Security generally controls what happens in the interior. And within the Department of Homeland Security, it's divided into Immigration and Customs Enforcement, which is like the immigration police. They will go around, the people that arrest people in the interior and refer people for deportation proceedings. That's ICE. Customs and Border Protection is the agency that patrols the border. So they'll stop people from coming in, or they stop merchandise or goods from coming in as well. And then there's United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, USCIS. And that's the agency that will handle most of these petitions. And I'll show you some of the applications that they handle in a second. And so those are all under the umbrella of the Department of Homeland Security. There's also the Department of State, which controls when people are outside the country trying to get in. So with a consular officer, they're part of the Department of State. So they're handling people when they're coming in when they're outside the country trying to get in. Inside the country, you're going to be dealing with the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, or those are the people that do benefits. So now we talked about what the barriers are. I'm going to go through the legal barriers, but it was brought up to me before that we didn't talk about how much things cost. And cost is certainly a barrier for a lot of people to be able to file petitions. For example, I was going to put it on the screen, but you can go to USCIS website and you'll see they have all the different fees with all the different applications. An example is filing an I-130 petition would cost $535, and that's just for the first part of the petition. And then I mentioned how people can adjust status in the United States. That fee is $1,225. So to do that process without an attorney would be $1,000, someone do the math, like $700? To get you the green card in the United States. Yep, plus the petitions, plus the 535, so 1,760. And then for an application for naturalization, which is when someone becomes a citizen, it's $640 is the fee. Plus 85 for biometrics, which is your finger. There's a fee waiver available for certain benefits, such as the naturalization. There's a fee waiver available that people can qualify. So there's going to be a citizenship day that hopefully people will come to, and we can work on that. Okay, so other barriers. So like you've got your I-130 petition approved. The petition's current. You went through the priority date. And your priority date's current, and you're ready to adjust. Now, what are some barriers to being able to adjust? One thing is unlawful presence, and this is really hard to wrap your head around, and it really doesn't make that much sense. But if someone lives in the United States for more than a year without permission, and then they leave after April 1st, 1997, because that's when the new rules went into place. If they lived here for more than a year without permission, and they left the country, and then came back or tried to come back, regardless of how long they were outside the country, they're subject to what's called the permanent bar under INA 212A9C, and that would mean that they have to be outside the United States for 10 years before there's any way to become a resident. So I see this situation all the time, where people have no crimes. The only thing that's barring them from becoming a resident, they have a current petition, they've lived here for a long time, but the only thing that's barring them from becoming a resident is they're subject to this 212A9C, because they left even for a day and came back. So when you talk to people about it, I mean, it's a law that produces crazy results. And it's also, I mean, it separates people, because then people can't leave to go see their families. You're keeping people inside the United States, because they know if they leave, they might never be able to come back. And if they do come back, they're not gonna be able to become legal, lawful permanent residents. Another significant bar is when someone has a prior removal or deportation order. The vast majority of removal orders in the United States are summary removal orders, which means that they were conducted in an expedited fashion without a judge, oftentimes at the border. So oftentimes people be stopped at the border and they were told to sign something, and they signed something, and now they have a removal order. And if someone has one removal order, they're subject to what's called reinstatement of removal. And reinstatement of removal is when they're gonna reinforce that same order without giving you the opportunity to see a judge. So people could be here if they have a previous removal and they're picked up by ICE. ICE, remember, is the Immigration Police Branch. You wouldn't get the opportunity to see the Executive Office for Immigration Review, which is the Immigration Court branch. You would just be summarily removed from the United States, and this can happen within weeks. So these are really the big non-criminal bars to becoming a resident. Is if you have this unlawful presence bar, or you have a prior removal, which can be any contact with immigration officials, including at the border. Another bar is a false claim to citizenship. If someone claims to be a U.S. citizen to receive any benefit under state or national law, then that person is subject to it's also a permanent ground where someone can't waive it. There are certain exceptions for people that have already entered the United States, but in general, if someone's claimed to be a U.S. citizen, they're not going to ever be able to become a resident. So those are some of the very severe bars just based on immigration law violations. Then there's criminal law violations, which is extremely complicated. And I'm not gonna really get into what specific kind of crimes will lead someone to be not allowed to become a resident, but they can be really small. It can be as little as like, if you get a petty theft, if you get multiple petty thefts, or if you get a petty theft with too much jail time, even if it's all suspended, like that kind of thing could result in someone not being able to become a resident in the United States ever. So I guess with the criminal law violations, it'd be, if you have anything in your past, the person would really need to see an attorney. It doesn't make sense how something that seems small in criminal court can end up ruining someone's life in immigration. So, do you want this? Okay, Maria's gonna talk.
We have a couple questions we'll work into finishing up here in the last couple of minutes. So I just wanted to touch on a couple of things, and I'll ask others for their input too. So of course, one of the things that's been hotly litigated, right, is this ability to keep out certain individuals from the United States. The original, quote, travel ban or Muslim ban, or however it would have been described, included all of the countries that are named there, but of course in the first revision, Iraq got removed from the list. The most recent thing that happened litigation-wise was So the lower court, not the Supreme Court, had said, you know, we don't think we think that there's enough chance that the travel ban is not lawful because we think it's too much motivated specifically to, for certain nationalities and certain religions, which is impermissible to draw a line for that. Like if the rule were, we think this is necessary because of, you know, security concerns only, and there had never been any mention of where people were from or what their religions are, it may have been a different kind of case, but there was evidence, right, out in social media and elsewhere where the executive and members of the executive were saying why they wanted to do it. So the lower courts had said, like, we don't think there's a good enough chance of this ever becoming law, so we're gonna do something called a stay, meaning we're gonna say the government can't enforce this until we get a final decision by a court. So the government appealed that, they went to the Supreme Court, the Supreme Court said, yeah, well, we're not sure either if the government will win here or not, but we think, on balance, we're gonna let two provisions of the revised travel ban go into effect for now, and then you can all come back in October, and we're gonna hear the arguments from the parties in October. So it was lifting the stay, meaning we're going to allow the law to go in force in these two provisions just for now. And then folks will come back in October, we'll decide forever what happens. And in the interim, right, the revision was, it was left that if you have a significant connection to the United States, that you would be allowed to come in even if you were from one of these countries. And the significant connection that has ultimately, that is what it is now, is it includes certain family relationships and includes grandparents. Grandparents were not, like if you were applying to come in, you said, well, I'm coming to see my grandparent, or my grandparents coming in to see me. That was at first not declared to the CBP, Customs and Border Protection, and Department of Homeland Security decided that wasn't significant enough, and that got changed later on. There was a lower court decision that said, oh, well, if you've been designated as a refugee and you have a place and you know where you're going and you have a contract, that ought to be enough. And that has been put on hold for now. So generally, if you have a legal permanent, if you are a lawful permanent resident from one of these countries, if you have one of the family relationships we talked about, generally in getting a petition, you should be getting it. Now, I had asked my co-presenter whether or not how that was playing out for the folks you work with, and I thought you might be able to give us a little information.
Yes. In short term, we are not seeing any effect on our program, but probably in long term, yes, because our numbers, if you remember, I told you, I don't know if I told you, but in the last 5 years, Idaho, here we have been resettling around an average of 1,000 to 1,100 refugees every year. But starting next year, we will have an average of 500 to 600 refugees. So probably is the effect of that ban. And another thing, to prove a family relationship, we look at in our pipeline for people that have family ties here. We did ask if you have any documentation to prove a family ties between you and that person in the camp, bring it. We might be able to help you with that, to send it. But now they brought this documentation, we sent it to our headquarters, and they don't know where to go from there. So we are also confused and waiting.
And as to the refugee admission, one of the interesting things I think about the case of the Supreme Court is they set it out more than 90 days, right? October is 90 days. So the whole reason for the refugee thing, right, for the ban on the refugees was we need 90 days to figure out what's going on and to look at their processes. So the parties were before the Supreme Court and they were asking, like, you haven't told us exactly what you've done in the so many days that have passed since this whole litigation started, and you better be ready to come back here and tell us what you did in the more than 90 days that passed. So that's going to be an interesting thing to watch for in the litigation. Next one. I just put in there because this was the airport protest in Boise. Thought I'd throw that in. So the next thing that I just think is important for us to keep in mind is a lot of these people, a lot of non-citizens who are fighting for to avoid removal or to file a petition have to do so when they're in the course of deportation proceedings. And many people have to do those proceedings while they're detained. Now, although these are civil proceedings, right, so they still go to basically jails. Okay? And so this map shows you all of the places across the country where people are detained for civil detention for immigration proceedings. The red ones are actually not DHS-run facilities. They're either contracts with county jails or they are, well, they're mostly contracts with county jails, actually. And so Idaho, and they put these here. These aren't formal contracts, but these are places that we know where people are being held. So like Elmore County is in here. We know Washington County and Canyon County. They don't have formal contracts there, but we know that that's where individuals are temporarily housed until they could get them on a bus, usually, and either they're going south because they're being removed, typically, or they're going north because they're going to this black spot here, which is one of the biggest DHS detention facilities in the country, which is in Tacoma, Washington. It's contracted by Geo Group, isn't it? It's actually, yeah. So they're using the Private Prison Corporation. For those of you that have been following private prison industries, CCA, Geo Group, this is like business they are going after, right, is to run these facilities. And immigration detention is really harmful. Go ahead. So they were really harmful for individuals' chances of effectively litigating their cases. In 2015, there were about 325,000 individuals who were being held. It was discovered through some Freedom of Information Acts that attorneys did that there was basically a bed mandate, that there had been a directive from the executive that they wanted so many beds filled every day. And what happens in immigration detention is, one, you not only lose, first of all, a lot of these places are far away from lawyers and city centers. So it's very hard and expensive if you have a lawyer, because then you have to get them to travel and go down there. You have the same cost prohibitive phone calls that inmates have. The healthcare services can be questionable, or it can be just very difficult to get information out. So we've had cases, tons of cases in Tacoma, where we're get your medical records, and it's a huge problem just to have the individual make the request, to get the records, to get them to us, to mail them out. And so the number of people that are detained, the chances of success go way down if you're detained. It's already I think it's 5 times as likely to win an asylum case if you're represented. So that's just plain represented, but it's I don't have those statistics. It's significantly harder to do it if you're detained. Do you know that number? No. It's hard. So let's go to the next one. So this is Tacoma, Washington. There's been a permanent encampment outside. So this a photo we took last time we were there. I don't think we're going to go through this, but let me get to some questions. The other thing about the county jail, so one of the actions that the IOP has been really active in is supporting the community of Jerome, that has reached out to both the ACLU and IOP for support in fighting against what has been a proposed. The sheriff there and ICE have been talking about entering a formal, getting the commissioners, 3 commissioners, to vote in favor of renting 50 beds. So ICE wants to pay for 50 beds in the new Jerome County Jail that they will pay for whether they're full or not. And they're going to pay more money than a county would. And so although the jail was built for overflow from other Idaho counties, they're entertaining the idea of making it, reserved for ICE because they pay more. And so you're going to have at least 50 people, if not 150, if they cycle 3 people through 1 bed, right, every month, or 2 people through 1 bed every month. So the community's been really in an uproar about formalizing that kind of relationship. So it's happening here locally as well. The other thing I would just say with regard to the executive orders and how they're playing out here locally, I'd say that the number one thing, well, maybe not number one, but among the top things that I'm noticing is that getting people released from detention. So if you get arrested in Idaho, the immigration ICE, they have the authority to set a bond for you right then, before you even get locked up and put on a bus on your way to Tacoma. And it used to be that you could get them to set a reasonable bond, if somebody had good ties to the community, didn't have big criminal record or something. So pretty much nobody is getting bonds. I mean, we've gotten one or two, but they've been higher than they would have ever been before. So somebody we would have thought would get out with a $1,500 bond is now looking at like a $8,000 or a $15,000. And it's important to know that bonds in civil immigration proceedings do not work like they do in criminal. In criminal cases, if you have a $100,000 bond, usually you only have to pay 10% up to a bondsman, and they'll pay the rest. You're probably not explaining it correctly. You have to pay you basically have to pay 100% of the money. If the bond is $10,000 in immigration, you got to come up with $10,000. And a bondsman is not going to write the bond for you unless you show them that you have something you could sell or accrue on your credit card or a bank account worth basically $10,000. So it's really hard to get the money together to pay a bond. And so you have a lot more people being detained, a lot more people that can't post bond. The other would be the collateral arrests that we're hearing about. So it was not uncommon before for ICE to have the name and number or address of somebody that they knew had a criminal record, they knew had been removed before, and they would go to that person's house if they got word that that person was back. And if that happened, it was not common for ICE to just arrest everybody in the house. The kids, the grandma, somebody who wasn't involved at all in whatever is the aggravating factor in this individual person's history. But now that's changed. That's totally changed. So everybody's at risk. And that's been really the most, it's been difficult for us to be able, as attorneys, to be able to assess risk for our clients. And that's probably been one of the most frustrating things. So that's the state of affairs of immigration law. I have a couple questions where I think we'll pass the mic to answer some of these. One question was about for people in legal limbo, can you get somebody into the United States, for instance, to participate in like a custody battle or a termination of parental rights case? Yes and no. Yes, the law allows you to make a request. No guarantee they'll get in. I had a case like that. Somebody's parents, somebody was going to have their parental rights terminated. We got a court order that he had to be there. We tried multiple times, but we couldn't get him in. Because in the end of the day, when you're asking for a discretionary benefit and there's no statute that says we must let you in, if the consular officer doesn't want to give you a visa, or if the CBP officer at the border just decides they don't want to let you in, they don't have to let you in. And so in that case, the answer to that question would be no, there's no guarantee to get into the country for that purpose. And professional credentials, I'm not really sure what this question is. It might have to do with somebody who comes in on a work visa and is a professional, and can they just practice anywhere?
Well, I was more wondering about refugees that come in. You get such a variety of people coming in. You've got 8 months to have a job. Maybe they've been an engineer or a teacher or mathematician. How does that work?
Yeah.
So a person coming, we get people from different background, from no formal education, and a lot of doctors actually are here in Boise, Idaho, that are resettled as a refugee. Remember, they have 8 months to adapt. After 8 months, there is no cash assistance. So it will be difficult for the person to choose his first job. Usually they take it to be able to pay the bills. But however, we have a program that is called Career Pathway. So if you have a degree, so you can come as a year later, or if just do not disrupt your job. While you are working, you can come and then you can upgrade your job. So there is a program like that for people with a degree.
So that's all that we have. I was going to pass the mic to Beth so she can announce the upcoming Citizenship Day drives we do. Tell you what that's about. It's a really intense we need a lot of volunteers for these events. So I'll hand it off to you.
All right. So as Maria was saying, IOP does quite a few different events or actions to try to support the immigrant community. So one of them that we're working with Jerome to kind of support any work they're doing. So usually we'll put that out on our Facebook page, or you could contact any of us via email, and we're happy to let you know they're going to be voting soon, so we're trying to get people there, or just other things that we're trying to do. We're also having DACA week coming up, so from August 27 to September 2nd, we're going to be, yeah, please.
I can talk a little bit about that. We're having DACA week August 27th through September 2nd. Our first event is going to be August 27th from 4 to 6. We're not exactly sure where we're going to have it, so keep on our IOP Facebook page. Let us know. If not, you can sign up and we can let you know the information. But we're going to do a DACA and DREAM Act, reintroduce DREAM Act 101 informational session, so we're hoping educators in the community comes. Then we're going to have art exhibit. We're going to actually hopefully use Casita Nempantla, that's housed in Boise State, and do different kinds of art featuring DACA students. We're going to have story night, which will talk about the stories of DACA students. So we're collecting stories from around Idaho with different DACA students. And then we just found out we got a little bit of money. We might actually bring a person who directed a movie called Mi Vida DACA, My Life DACA, and we're probably going to have that at Boise State, but we just found this out, so this is pretty cool, awesome opportunity. And then we're going to keep doing events across the, during the year. We did just make a postcard, which we're going to finalize here soon, to send to Governor Otter, because we know he's one of the only governors that signed that threatening lawsuit thing that happened. So just keep up on our Facebook page, and then we'll let you know more events. Thank you.
And then the other major project that we're working on is doing emergency planning workshops and citizenship days. So from September until December, we're going to be working to go into different communities to give some information, but then also to help do some of the filing of applications. And that, as Maria said, is super labor intensive to get us there and make sure that we have enough people in the printing of applications and making sure people have get the word out and different things. So we're happy to have people help us out, whether it's here, getting us ready for it, or going there with us. Any support and help is great. Yeah. So we have Driggs in Idaho Falls will be September 16 through 17. Then in October, we're going to do Burley and Jerome on October 14th and 15th. Haley will be October 20 and 21, and then, or possibly the 27th and 28th. We're still working out those dates. Weiser and Fruitland will be November 17th and 18th, and then Caldwell will be December 8 and 9. So we're trying to do one a month and getting out into other parts of Idaho.
Well, thanks everyone for being here, and there's flyers with all those dates and events and how to get in touch, and hopefully